So welcome to our Hear from a Peer Social Investment Tax Relief webinar. We have from just after 9:30 until 11 a.m. This is a very informal session designed to help you understand how you can, the three different ways that you can raise money using social investment tax relief, but most importantly, so that you can have the opportunity to ask people who've already done it questions. I suppose the rules for this engagement, if there are any rules, are that there are no stupid questions. So if somebody, if you don't ask them, somebody else is probably sitting there thinking them. Also, we learn from doing. So please feel free. This isn't a sales webinar. This is about having the opportunity to learn from others who've already been there before. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with a very short video. I would say that it's better for you to learn about social investment tax relief without having to listen to me witter on, but unfortunately you will find that I do make a guest appearance in this next video. So let's just show you a short video in case anybody's in any doubt about what social investment tax relief is.
It's great to be here in Edinburgh, and I'm really keen to find out more about Breadshare and why you started your social enterprise.
We are all about promoting the health benefits of what we call real bread, and that's bread made without any additives. And unfortunately, 95% of the bread-like substance that's produced out there every day doesn't meet that criteria. We started in 2011. About 3 years in, we realised we really weren't big enough to be sustainable, and we made the decision to move into Edinburgh, but we needed some funding support to do that. Social investment tax relief was one of the funding sources.
As soon as you mention the words tax, I tend to switch off. But I understand that social investment tax relief is a new and exciting way that social enterprises and charities can raise investment. Now, to keep this bit interesting, we're going to explain using bread. So over to Jeff, Breadshare's chief baker.
Imagine I'm a social enterprise or a charity. Often organisations like me need finance to grow, to trial new products or for new employees. In short, we need dough. So for the sake of argument, let's say that this is a charity's dough. It's looking in good shape, might make a few good rolls with it, but we want to do more. So let's say we know an investor who likes our work, believes in what we do, and is keen to support us and make a return. She's got dough and wants to invest in my charity or social enterprise. So SITR allows her to do this in a way that's good for both of us. So let's say that she agrees to invest this dough in the business at an interest rate that is agreeable to her but affordable to us. As an incentive, the government then agrees to give her back 30% of what she invested at the end of the financial year. So our charity then takes our investors' dough and then uses it. After an allotted period of time, we then pay back the investment with the interest agreed previously. So our investor gets her dough back with interest, as well as 30% of the original amount from the government in the form of tax relief.
Thanks very much for having us here at Breadshare. It's been great hearing more about social investment tax relief.
So let me just quickly do introductions of who we've got speaking today. We're actually going to cover 3 of these ways of raising investment using social investment tax relief. First of all, we're going to hear from Stephanie Lim, who is the Secretary for Holbrook Community Society that run the Spotted Cow in Derbyshire, and they're going to talk through their experience of raising SITR using community shares. We're then going to hear from Mel Ellis of Challenge Academy Community Interest Company about their experience of raising SITR through a fund. And last but by no means least, we're going to hear from Julius Ibrahim from Second Shop Coffee, CIC, about raising SITR investment in a direct way, so raising it from individuals. Right, I'd like to welcome Stephanie Lim to our Hear from a Peer SITR webinar. Stephanie is the Secretary for Holbrook Community Society, who run the Spotted Cow Pub. And it's great to have Stephanie here to talk to us about
how they raised investment using SITR through community shares. So Stephanie, I'm going to hand over to you, and you've got about 15 minutes to talk us through, tell the attendees on the webinar what Holbrook Community Society does, how you came to be, why you needed to raise investment, and I'm sure we're all keen to hear how the process of using SITR went, and your learning really that the journey went through. And then what we'll do is I'll come back to you at the end and we'll ask some questions. So over to you.
Thank you. So the Spotted Cow Public House is a village pub which closed down back in 2014. The pub was repossessed and put on the market as a development opportunity. The people in the village were completely unaware, and it went on to be bought by a property developer, and another developer bought the option to buy. We then found out as a village that this property developer had put in a planning application to build 8 houses and demolish most of the pub. And so that's when we rallied round and decided to raise community shares, buy the pub and put it in community ownership. We found out about assets of community value and listed it as an asset of community value. And we got help from the Plunkett Foundation immediately, who helped us to register as a community benefit society with the FCA. They were fantastic. They fast-tracked us, the Plunkett Foundation, onto their More Than a Pub scheme, and we were awarded a grant and an advisor. And we launched a community share offer on the 23rd of November in 2016, 10 days after a planning decision not to give change of use to the pub was made. It's fair to say that we kind of rushed things because we were very aware of only having 6 months to raise money. And we did a lot of things back to front. We started to raise the funds in the community to begin with, but funds started to dry up quite quickly, and we decided to rethink and relaunch on crowdfunder. That's at the point where we decided to get back in touch with the Plunkett Foundation, and they gave us an advisor, David Hollings, who helped us to get the standard mark and to raise shares on crowdfunder. So at that point, Dave looked through the business plan and the share offer that we'd already written, and he gave us some advice. We were keen at that point that we wanted to get advanced assurance of SITR in order to maximise our investments. And we just decided to go for the standard mark as well because we wanted that extra assurance. We hadn't decided at that point completely how we were going to manage the whole business. There were several strands to the business. When we asked the community what they wanted from the Spotted Cow under community ownership, they wanted a pub, a restaurant, a cafe as well, but they also wanted to find a new home for the village post office, which was under threat. We decided we wanted to lease out some elements of this business because we didn't feel as a community group we had the skills necessary to do it all. But at that point, I'd sent off a business plan to HMRC asking for advanced assurance of SITR that had kind of edged its bets and not decided completely what model would go down. Dave Hollings read through it and he said we needed to decide some fundamental questions, whether we were going to lease parts of the business or manage it all, and how the business would run. We had a vote and decided that we were going to lease out part of the pub, and at that point I thought that we weren't going to get advanced assurance of SITR, which would have been a real shame. But Dave gave me a bit of advice on our business plan. He said that whilst he wasn't able to give a definitive answer on SITR, and he asked a lot of his colleagues nationally, no one had come back to him with examples of a tenanted pub that had SITR advanced approval. However, our business plan showed that we had quite a lot of other stuff going on in the business, and there's a 20% de minimis for rental income for a qualifying trade in other schemes like EIS. He wasn't sure how HMRC would see it for SITR, but if we could show that in our figures, then we had a good chance. So I updated everything in our new business plan and I sent it all off to HMRC again, and I'd reached the top of the queue at that point, and they read through it and they did award us advance assurance of SITR. We've gone on to purchase the pub, we renovated it, it took a few months to renovate, and then everything's ongoing. We created the cafe and bed and breakfast facility, which we manage ourselves. We got tenants in to run the pub part of the business, so that takes a lot of pressure off the community group, and we're able to focus on other bits of the business. And then we finally got the post office this August, because that was quite a long process as well. And our long-serving postmistress in the village was finally able to retire, and we were able to take the post office on. So in the end, we had investors, we had 260 investors in the end. We raised 292,000. We bought the pub for 275, and then we raised a loan for the rest of the money to do the renovations. I completed the SITR, the SITR certificates. That's the word I was looking for. And it were £78,000 worth of investments claimed SITR in the end. So we know who claimed, and we did those. I think that's, yeah, covers most of the points that I wanted to cover.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can I just ask you a question, Stephanie, about the investment? So you raised 278,000, and you took the rest. You took a loan for the top up, and you know how many people claimed SITR, which is obviously considerably less than the amount that you raised. When you put together, and I know you had some help and support, I think you've been really good at explaining the support you've got from other agencies like the Plunkett Foundation and the More Than a Pub scheme. But how did you hear about SITR? Why did you decide to use it? You said you wanted to maximise the investment. Can you just explain a little bit more about what you mean when you say that?
So I'd read about SITR, and I thought it sounded a bit too good to be true when I read about it, because you get the 30% back of your initial investment, and I just thought, well, people are bound to invest more than they initially would, knowing they'll get some of it back. And I think that definitely was the case. I heard about it through, I think it was through the Plunkett Foundation. They talked about EIS and SITR on their different, I think Sally talked to me about it, our advisor, about a way of raising more money and how to talk to those investors who might be investing a larger sum than the minimum investment. We raised shares through asking for a minimum investment of £250 and a maximum of 50,000. So fair to say we didn't get many huge investors, but we got quite a lot around the 5,000 mark, and they told us that they would have invested less. It was knowing that they could claim back 30% of their investment that made them put a bit more in.
Okay. Yeah, so we often hear about that, and I think it's definitely worth, when we start to talk about these tax relief like EIS and SITR, there's an awful lot of acronyms in there. So one of the things that we've been able to do as part of the Get SITR campaign is to produce now a simple guide to tax relief. So if any of the attendees are wondering more about what are the difference in these tax reliefs, how do you use them, when they can apply, then we'll make sure that the link to that simple guide is something that you can find easily. You talked a little bit about your business plan and about the 80-20 rule. So we always tell people that social investment tax relief can be used for trading activity. And you explained about how, despite the fact you do something that is now currently ineligible for reassurance for SITR, which is leasing, actually you are able to do an amount of that as long as you've got a varied amount of income streams. I think that's something people will probably find really interesting. When you talk about your community society and then you think of the pub, you tend to think just about the pub, but actually you've got a whole lot more going on, haven't you, in your trading activity?
Yes, so it's a whole community hub. It's quite a big building, and we lease the pub part of it, but we were very careful in our business plan that we sent to HMRC that we listed all of the other things that were going on in the business first. So that we've got a guest room, and we've got a cafe that we run, and we've also got the post office in there. So we've got all these other things going on as part of the business. And then we do charge quite a reasonable rent for the pub, which brings that trading, that activity, excluded trade activity, down to a reasonable amount. And we wanted to do that initially anyway, because we wanted to give our tenants a fair crack at kind of making a business for themselves to begin with, and then after a couple of years, after 3 years, we'd be able to increase the rent and see rewards of that. And we also we talked to HMRC about the possibility of it being more of a hybrid and it looking at more of a profit share from them. So they kind of the rules are, I think it's more of a case-by-case basis that they look at, rather than it being a hard and fast rule. And I think they looked at our whole business and said what thought this felt like a community running quite a lot of a business and leasing a little bit of it out, rather than it being just buying an asset and leasing it.
Okay, so I mean I think that's something we often say to people. That's a really good example of the fact that in order to get pre-assurance, it's all based on the information that you provide. So don't miss anything out, because pre-assurance is only as good as the information you submit, and it's much better to talk through with HMRC the scenario you're looking at, because actually you still have the option, if you like, to change or adapt your trading model if you want to use SITR, as long as HMRC believe that that's acceptable. The other question that I had for you, Stephanie, is you talked about originally starting and raising money through the community, and you said that quickly dried up. So can you just talk us through, for other attendees who think perhaps doing this using community shares, about the role of crowdfunder and how the platform helped you to raise the investment, so that we have an idea how much had you raised before and how much did you go on? We know what the total you raised. How much do you actually raise once you were out with the crowdfunder platform?
So we started raising within the community, and we raised, I think, 30,000 fairly quickly, and then another 10 came in towards the end of that. And I think people were saying on Facebook and on our webpage there wasn't a clear route to invest, because we just put the share offer out there, and then it was the rule, the instructions were to write a check and send it in the post to my house or put it through my door. It was a lot more difficult than actually just following a web link and just clicking and pledging money. So crowdfunder just made it a whole lot easier to invest. It brought it out to a wider audience. It meant that we focused on telling our story much more simply, because we made a short film that we were able to show, and it wasn't just a dry document people were reading. People could see the story, and it brought it to life. And then once it went out through crowdfunder, we then managed to raise the full amount. So initially we raised just over 275 that we needed to buy it, but we've raised a little bit more since, because people have invested since then.
Okay, so that's I think that's another really interesting dynamic for the attendees to the webinar who are thinking about the 3 different ways that you can raise investment using social investment tax relief. But I think where the role of working with a platform helps is in that reaching that wider audience, because again, another thing that we have to consider is, once we're looking to raise investment in any organisation, we need to think about the financial promotions and credit brokerage rules and regulations. So instead of just being able to go out and put on your website that you're raising investment and tell everybody about it, you need to start to think about those things, and working through a platform can help you to get the message out wider, but to make sure that people really understand that this is an investment proposition that's being put before them. I know lots of organisations often find that working with a third party, you can do this directly and do it on your own, but they often find that that's helpful. And again, this is something that I know I found quite difficult to get my head round at the beginning, because when you say, oh, you have to be careful of financial promotions, I automatically thought, well, I don't really know which bit of financial promotions we have to be careful of. So we were able to publish another simple guide, and it is really easily readable, and again, it's available free through Get SITR. We'll include that link. So I think my final question that I wanted to ask you, Stephanie, is about, what are your top tips? If somebody else was in this position now, what would you give as your 3 top tips?
I'd say get in touch with the Plunkett Foundation early and try to get funding for an advisor. Get the community shares standard mark early, so that you know that you've got that you've reached a certain standard and you've got credibility to your shares, your share offer. And finally, I think it's launch once and launch well. Don't kind of do it the way we did it, where you launch once and then you have to redo things. I think just plan it carefully and do it properly with a really strong message, and do it properly and do it well.
Okay. And in terms of social investment tax relief, would you do it again? And would you recommend somebody else to do it? And was it worth the hassle, I suppose?
It was definitely worth the hassle, and I think all the people who've got their money back are amazed when they get this check back from HMRC of actual money just back to them. I think they're a bit surprised that it works. And I definitely would do it again. And I think I'd make the message a lot clearer about social investment tax relief to begin with as well. It is quite an arduous process collecting all of the names and the dates of their investments and getting it all off to HMRC, but it is worth it, I think.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Mel, do you want to start off by telling us, first of all, tell us a bit about what Challenge Academy does. I'm sure we're all keen to then hear about why did you need investment, and what the pros and cons are, I suppose, of raising investment for a fund, what you're going to do with the money, and I'm sure that the audience will be keen to know how long is the term of your loan over, what lessons did you learn, what was expected, best bits and the worst bits. We've got about 15 minutes for this, Mel, so if you want to start off, and then I'll perhaps come back to you and interject with some questions.
Okay, great. So Challenge Academy was formed about 2 years ago now. We're based in the West Midlands. We have a centre at Baggeridge Country Park, just south of Wolverhampton, where we've been supported really well by South Staffordshire and the local community. in bringing what I suppose the best description would be active outdoor learning opportunities to our community. So what we have there is we have our own high ropes course and adventure facilities. We're at a fairly sort of Spartan site, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. So with a lot of our learning opportunities, we felt we needed to expand our facility. So if I describe that we have an adventure hub, we have the need for facilities there, but also we have the need to develop our offer further afield. So we have a number of resources and training programs that we deliver within the local community and actually further afield as well, which is what I'm doing over here in Abu Dhabi. It sounds very, it sounds amazing that I'm over here, but I can tell you it's a very rare occurrence that we get the chance to travel overseas. Most of our work is done in the West Midlands. So yeah, Challenge Academy, it has its own facility. We have our own resources, we have our own programs, we have developed our own team building equipment, we have worked very hard to get our own accreditation, and we felt, about 1 year ago that having all of this was great. We needed to launch it, we needed more staff to do the marketing, we needed a place to keep our equipment, we needed more classroom space on site at Baggeridge. We have been extremely well supported, and we had the offer of some local grants, but the challenge that we had was that we couldn't get those grants unless we raised the match funding. So in terms of being much more sustainable, we needed those grants to develop. We needed the staff in place so we could extend our reach and have that social impact. That's really where we're at the moment. We've been very successful. I think we've worked very hard to raise the money, and I first heard about SITR through another organisation that I was working with in Bristol. I understood that there was funding available. I did a lot of research and eventually made contact with residents, found out that they were starting a West Midlands SITR campaign, and thought, right, that's it, and we need to sort of really try hard to get some of that. And the journey really over the last year, we've just received the investment and we're ready to go. It's a very exciting time for us. We will use this investment to build, to get this sort of grant funding, to make sure we have the appropriate staff in place, and to really launch our campaigns for more the campaign to actually get out there and bring our resources, training, and develop our own site at Baggeridge. So that, in a nutshell, is where we're at the moment. Mel, you wanted me to talk a little bit about our experience of raising the money, is that correct?
Yes, please, that would be good. I think we'd be keen to know as well, how much have you borrowed? How long have you borrowed it over? What sort of interest rate are you paying? And then because I think we were always keen to know about the key stats. But then again, let's talk us through the sort of, what were the good bits and what were the bits you didn't expect. And I'm quite keen to hear, I hear this from a lot of different social entrepreneurs, not necessarily about social investment tax relief. So I'm quite keen to hear how that stacks up, I suppose, with all the other things I hear from around the country.
Sure thing. Okay. Well, first of all, the experience of getting this money has been extremely positive, because it's not just a case of getting money, getting the investment. We've actually been successful in getting £150,000 worth of investment, SITR, which we will use partly to match fund these other. We receive another 90,000 of match funded grants. So really, the 150,000, we might as well. I suppose for the best way to think of that increases to 240,000 in terms of what we have available to develop. The great thing about this investment, it's taken some time. I suppose since we first got in touch with residents, it's taken 12 months to get to this point. But every part of that has been a really valuable journey for us, because I am an outdoor instructor. I'm a trainer. I'm a coach. I like to think of myself as a businessman, but I've learned so much over the last year in terms of how to plan for the future, and residents have been so supportive with that. And that's something you don't normally get on the high street, of course. And that, you know, the fact that I've scrutinised very much, or I've been asked to scrutinise our business plan and do all of the stress testing on that business plan. What happens if things don't work out in certain areas? Do we have things lined up to actually develop other elements, the plan B, the plan C, even the plan D, you know? So we've gone through all of that, and I feel so much more confident as a businessman, I suppose, now, having gone through that journey. So yeah, 150,000, of which I think it works out about 120k is going to be used for the match funding, and the remainder is really going to be used to get appropriate staff in place. The pressure is on, of course, because, you know, we have to grow our business quite significantly over the next 2 years. But what I find is that the way this loan stacks up is that for the first 3 years, of course, it's just you pay the interest on the loan, and it's not until years 4, 5, and 6 that you have to repay the capital, which is a very attractive proposition in terms of allowing us to really sort of to get some traction and get going.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So I'll have a look at the minute, and hopefully we've got some questions that people are thinking about asking. But I think you've covered some of the key facets of social investment tax relief there. And I know that's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about it, if I'm honest. And I really wasn't joking on the video, even though you couldn't hear me say it. You know, I didn't think I could ever get that excited about tax. But the reason it's exciting is because social enterprises and charities often want patient capital, which basically means they want to be able to grow and develop their organisation before they are able to start paying investment, but they need to front load the money. So what's quite interesting, although SITR can't be secured on property, part of your loan is going to go on capital investment so that you can actually buy more kit and more physical things, and part of it's going to go on working capital to build your business. I think the other thing that's always really interesting, and actually, as I said, this doesn't seem to apply just to social investment tax relief, but what everybody tells me is that generally raising any kind of investment takes longer than you think. And I know that your introduction to the organisation you actually ended up borrowing money from came via their Bristol SITR fund. It took a number of months to get that up and running. But, you know, that's general guidance that however long you think it's going to take, it takes longer. Yeah, Julius is nodding, so I'm thinking that one might come out as well too. You know, I often say to people that raising social investment of any kind is not something you want to do when your back is against the wall. This should be something about positive, about growth, and about helping your business develop. I think the other thing that you mentioned, Mel, which I think comes out a lot, is that nobody particularly likes, well, I have actually found one person who likes, one lady based in Nottingham who told me she enjoyed due diligence, okay? Not many people like the process of having to go through all the number crunching and the stress testing, and because, you know, as Mel said, he's an outdoors person who's a trainer and teacher. All us entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs to do the things that we like, the things that we're good at. But to run a business, you have to actually learn to develop some of these other skills. And so what I have heard people say is that although due diligence isn't particularly enjoyable, as Mel said, it's a valuable process to help strengthen your organisation. And I think that's definitely one of the things you would say that probably working with a fund manager will do, is obviously some of that assistance is built in to that process. You will get charged an amount of a fee for the arrangement and to cover some of those costs, but obviously you've got somebody working alongside you. Perhaps in some of the other ways that you might raise investment, those things might need to be paid for separately. So do we have any questions from anybody so far? If not, what's the interest rate we've got? And somebody else has asked me to slow down, so that's okay. I will try to talk quickly. It will be pre-recorded, this session, so you will be able to go back and listen. Mel, can you talk talk to us about the interest rate you're paying? I know you've said it's interest only for the first 3 years and then scaled up, but are you happy to give the attendees some perspective on what the cost of borrowing that interest is?
Yeah, I'd be very happy to give it, but you know what? I haven't got it in front of me at the moment, but I know it's very reasonable. I think it's around the 6% in terms of the interest, but please don't quote me on that because I haven't got the, it's much more competitive than High Street, put it that way.
Okay, I can probably give you a little bit more context, which is that SITR funds, and they do range, but somewhere their unsecured lending seems to range somewhere between 6.5% and 8.5%. As Mel referred to, if you were borrowing that kind of unsecured lending within the social investment space, you could pay anywhere from sort of 12 to 18% for that. And actually, if you were going to non-social investors, and this comes for the very big caveat that if you could get them to lend you the money, because probably this is a sort of risk profile that many mainstream lenders wouldn't be interested in taking, actually you could end up paying a lot more than those figures that have been quoted, because this is certainly what you would categorise as high risk lending. It's the most, what we would call the most junior form of debt, and that basically means that if things go wrong, you're at the bottom of the pile. So part of the reason the investor gets a tax relief or a tax rebate from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs is to offset some of that risk. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, if you are to, an individual is to invest £1,000 into an organisation using social investment tax relief, they will get, if it qualifies, £300 back from HMRC in the form of a tax rebate. So in other words, they're only putting £700 of their capital at risk. And alongside that, they will obviously be offered a rate of interest as part of the investment scheme that they're investing into. So they're able to benefit from the tax relief and get a payment rate of interest of realisation on the capital they've invested, and alongside that they will aim to get their capital back if everything is successful at the end of the investment term. So how much were the costs for the charity? For a fund, Mel, I think it's fair to say that costs are split into two places. It's split into the interest rate that you pay, and then also there is usually an administration fee, which again you'd have to talk to the investor about their administration fee. But usually the costs are the administration fee and then the interest, so usually somewhere around about 2% mark. I think it'll be interesting as we talk through the other couple of ways that you can raise investment using SITR. We'll talk about how the costs relate to those types of investment. So for instance, if we talk about community shares and you use a crowdfunding platform, there will be a fee that you will have to pay to the crowdfunding platform. I think it's probably fair to say that none of these things come without some level of charge. It's probably about understanding who you need to pay, how much you have to pay, and at what stages you need advice or guidance, and what's built in and what has to be paid for separately. So, Julius, we're going to tell us all about your organisation and why you used SITR.
Okay, so we launched Second Shot Coffee in May 2016, so about 2.5 years ago. And the idea behind the business is that we're a social enterprise coffee shop, so we're super kind of specialty coffee, trying to serve some of the best coffee in London. On the coffee side, we change our espresso every month. We have a rotating brew bar. We really try and be up there with the best in the industry. But then we're also a social enterprise that trains, supports, and employs people affected by homelessness. And so our kind of vision is that by coming into Second Shot, you shouldn't have to sacrifice anything from your kind of customer experience, but the social impact is a bonus. And we're kind of trying to show people, specifically in the hospitality industry, that you can also have an added social impact. So we do that in a couple of ways. So the first side is the employment. So we have lots of different relationships with charity partners who, when we're ready to recruit, they'll come to us with a couple of referrals, and we'll do a regular kind of recruitment process of interviews and trial shifts. And we'll have a trainee from background homelessness come and work with us for up to 6 months. They'll get trained on opening and closing the cafe, the till, trade on coffee if they like, and then we'll help them transition and find long-term employment elsewhere. So that's one way we have our social impact. The other way is through our pay it forward system. So this is where our customers kind of prepay so that later a local rustling can come in and get a free coffee or meal for free. So that was the kind of idea behind the business. And in order to get this off the ground, I needed to raise £75,000. That was for equipment, securing the actual space, the fit out, kind of the first few months of cash flow. And so I was kind of straight out of university trying to open up this business because I'd done social impact kind of projects before. I knew that this is what I kind of wanted to do. But for me, I kind of explored loads of other funding opportunities before I kind of found my way to SITR. So we actually did a crowdfunding campaign, which I say kind of went really, really great in every way except the money, because we only ended up with like 8% of our target. But through that, actually, I made kind of connections, which then led us onto SITR. So I also looked at grants, because I think it's very young, first-time business owner, first business, and also just the amount of money needed. I think it was kind of difficult to get that kind of funding through grants, I found. But yeah, I was actually introduced to a gentleman called Edward Gold, who told me and introduced me to the idea of SITR. And for me, it was kind of a really great kind of lifeline, because I think the great thing about SITR is that you can kind of get an introduction to a different kind of investor as well, because I think we were able to kind of target people who would otherwise maybe donate to charity, but kind of by investing in Second Shot, they were able to get just as much social impact, if not more, but also obviously get a return themselves. And so, yeah, I was introduced to a IFA called Evans Hart. Kind of similar to what we heard from Mel, I had to go through the process of making sure that, you know, I had a business plan already, but it had to kind of be much more kind of solid and robust in order to put together a slide deck for investors and really convince people that this was as solid as I thought it was. So yeah, we set up a investor presentation to Evans Hart, and then they then took Second Shot on board as part of their kind of portfolio and then pushed that out to their clients. I kind of liked what you were saying, Mel, about the timing, that it always takes much longer than you think. So overall, it took me probably like a year and a half, including the process of crowdfunding and looking for other opportunities. But I actually found that once I started on the path of SITR, it kind of came together quite quickly. So I think I found out about SITR in kind of December 2015. We had our investor presentation in maybe February, March, got the money in April, and then we opened in May.
Right.
So it all kind of came together quite quickly after that. And yeah, registering as a CIC obviously is crucial. We got the advance assurance for the loan. And yeah, as you kind of said, because of the tax relief, it makes it kind of a less risky investment. It also means that maybe you don't have to give away as much interest.
Okay.
And so for us, our interest rate was 3%. And in terms of kind of other fees, we actually did go through IFA Change, which we were talking about earlier with Russ Bubbly, who I think you had on this 6 weeks ago, you were saying. So there's fees there. And usually if you're going through an IFA, they would also take a fee for finding the individuals. But thankfully, Evans Hart didn't want to take that fee for us because of what we were doing, which was amazing. But I think kind of some of the challenges that we had was that, and it might be slightly different now, 2.5 years on, but nobody really knew what SITR was. And so it was kind of a case that we actually had to work with Evans Hart and educate them on what SITR is so that they could then educate their clients, and kind of work together through the process, because it was everybody's first time of doing it. So that was interesting, and that kind of came with its own challenges. Yeah, and so we manage, in total, we've got 15 different individuals on
Okay,
board.
15 investors, right? Okay.
And I think I'm right in saying with SITR you can have as many different individuals as you want, but it does mean that there's a lot more admin because you have to kind of coordinate the dates of investment, and if you don't, you have to do loads of different forms to fill out and whatnot. So coordinating that I found was one of the challenges.
Yes.
But the positives are definitely that hopefully you can not have to pay as high an interest rate as you would in other forms of funding. As well, it's interest only for us for the first 3 years, and then we pay the principal back in the fourth year.
Okay.
So that gave us time to kind of build our business, establish ourselves where we are in Bethnal Green. And then just now, we're now looking at doing a second round so that we can kind of fund our expansion, hopefully early next year. So our kind of experience of SITR has been really positive overall. And I would definitely kind of advise people to look at it as a way. I think the challenge for us is just making sure that link to try and find the actual individuals is kind of neater.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, I found that when I was kind of trying to get a second shot off the ground, I literally had no money, experience, or contacts, which made it super difficult, and why kind of took a year and a half. And so I think getting that access to individuals who are open to thinking about SITR is something that I found quite challenging.
Yes. So I think hopefully, I hope this will help, just to try and differentiate between how this works with a fund and then with raising individual investment. Mm-hmm. So actually, technically, when you receive investment via a fund, it is direct investment. It's investment from individuals directly into your organisation, but the fund manager does the work for you. So they go and find the investors, make sure that those investors are the types of investors who can afford to take the risk, because we need to differentiate. So there are 3 classifications, most commonly used classifications of investors. High net worth investors, so if you ever say HNWI, basically means people who have £1 million and more worth of disposable assets, and basically they're used to having an investment portfolio and will have taken the relevant advice and be, if you like, have a status as a high net worth investor. We have another category of investors called sophisticated retail investors, who are people who run investment portfolios, who again will work with a professional organisation to ensure that they understand the risk that their money is at. And then we have what we would call retail investors, which are for most of us is us, the man on the street. And those are people who might make smaller amounts of investments, often in form of crowdfunding, community shares, those sorts of things. But in order to be able to make sure that people, again, understand the risk, there needs to be some element of regulation. So one of the things that you can't do if you are thinking about raising social investment tax relief, well, you can do, but I wouldn't recommend it because you'd be breaking the law, is to go and put an investment prospectus on your website and say, come along and invest in us and you can get SITR, because actually you would be guilty of breaking the law, and you may well have the FSA after you. So to try and help you understand this, when I first came to Word of Social Investment, started talking about social investment tax relief, people often said, oh, you have to be careful of financial promotions. And I used to think, well, what do I have to be careful of? It sounded very expensive to me. It sounded like you would probably need legal advice to try and work out which bit. So we worked with Bates, Wells and Braithwaite to produce a simple guide to financial promotions. And I know it's simple because I'm not a legal or a tax expert and I can understand it. So I would say that if you're in any doubt about what you can do and you can't do, that's a really good resource to have a look at. It didn't exist the first time round when you were doing this. The other thing I would say is, if you are deciding to do what we would call a direct or a DIY investment, which is what Julius is describing, then working through or with a partner like an independent financial advisor is good, because again, they're able to help you with that due diligence piece about making sure you're finding the right investors. I would say on reflection, even 3 years, 4 years on, there's still not enough people know about social investment tax relief, hence why we're running this campaign. But We have produced another couple of resources which I think are really helpful in this space, and one of them actually is I'm going to come back to the one of the questions we had about a different form of tax relief in a minute. But we also have, it's a simple guide to financial promotions, Anna. One of the things that we'll do after this presentation is make sure we send that round as one of the links that we send. But we're also, in November, going to be launching a really simple SITR fact sheet for professional organisations. So hopefully that will help you. Next time you need to go and explain to an IFA or a wealth manager or a chartered professional in this space, they will have an SITR fact sheet. One exists in the EIS world. So if you're not sure what EIS stands for, in Enterprise Investment Scheme, but we don't currently have one of these things that exists in the SITR world. And that's for us to try and explain to organisations who might work with high net worth individuals or sophisticated investors who might want to consider using SITR as a way to invest. So it was also really interesting hearing you say, this was your first role out of university, this was a startup business, because again, in my day job, I often spend a lot of time saying to people that social investment is quite tough actually to use as a startup instrument, because generally people want some track record and some demonstration this works. So the process you went through to make your business plan really robust, I'm sure, was part of the way that you helped them to gain.
Yeah, I think as well, I have experience working in hospitality.
Great.
So I've worked in hospitality in some way since I was like 12.
Okay.
And at the time I was also managing a coffee shop in Mayfair. So I had some idea of, I was always kind of confident that if we could get open, then I could make a success of it, but that was always going to be the difficult part.
Okay.
And then, definitely the investor slide deck was crucial in making sure that the numbers were solid and the research behind it made sense.
Yes.
So I spent days and days in coffee shops of different sizes, like counting customer numbers and using those as the basis for my forecast. And I think, that presentation was crucial.
Okay. Great. So again, that's another really good example of the two things that would differ. So I suppose you almost make that akin to the sort of Dragon's Den piece where you're going and pitching and presenting to potential investors. Whereas when you get investment through a fund, I think it's fair to say, Mel, you didn't have to do that.
No, I didn't. Sometimes I felt like I was, but I think that was my perception more than anything else.
No, it's probably true.
Right at the start of my journey, I wasn't sure exactly how it looked, and I just heard about it. I met Grace. We had a few phone calls, first of all, with Grace England from Resonance, and really it just gradually evolved. Whereas I thought I might have to make a pitch at some point, but it was very much a question of Grace just doing all of her research, speaking to me, understanding by visiting us what our products and our programs were all about, and it was from there. Had I had to make a pitch, it would have been a difficult one, because all of our stuff you really have to go and do and feel rather than have somebody talk to you about it. So it was, right at the start, I just didn't appreciate what a process it would be. But like I said earlier, I'm very glad that we went through that process, because it was a very steep learning curve for me as well.
Okay, so you gained a lot from that process. Julius, one of the things that I'm interested to find out from you, you've got 15 different investors. So again, small technical point. Yes, you can have as many investors as you want using social investment tax relief. In fact, community shares and crowdfunding often have hundreds or even thousands of investors, but you must have more than 3. Okay, if you've never had any debt or investment before, you must have more than 3 investors, and the reason for that is no one individual can own more than a third of the debt. In other words, they can't have a controlling interest. So yes, you because I often get asked this question where people go, I have got a philanthropist who wants to come and invest. Well, actually, you need to get him to come bring at least a couple of friends along, because you can't have one person's money's there. But the question I'm interested to ask is, do you get anything else from those 15 investors? I was interested, for instance, the video we made, which I know you couldn't hear the sound of, but with Breadshare, when I was talking to Deborah, it was quite interesting. She said of her investors, I think she had less than 15. I think she only had, say, 6, I think it was. She said 4 of them really were, it was an investment. Yes, they cared about the social piece, but they were very much silent and away. She had one who was very interested in what they do, but just from a communication point of view. And then she had one who was more than interested and able to offer up other contacts, networks, and stuff that I suppose added value stuff. So not just their money. How have you found that with your 15 investors? Do you have is there any difference in their approach?
Yeah, there is definitely a difference. I think what we try and do is send out like a PDF update every now and again. But then I would say probably 2 or 3 of our investors kind of take an active interest and will be in kind of constant communication about how's it going and wanting to get constant kind of updates on our impact and how many copies and meals we've given out and how our employment and training is going. But I'd say, yeah, for the most part, it is kind of silent and we get in contact every now and again.
Seems quite interesting that the thing that I seem to feel comes across SITR investment is that the investors, they all care about impact, but the investors who really care about impact are the ones that tend to be closest and want to know a bit more. And things like the pay forward piece about how many meals have you served. I suppose what they're looking for, it seems, would you say, is that looking for what else has their money done? What impact has their money created? Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I'm going to try and give you a brief overview of Holbrook Community Benefit Society and the Spotted Cow. But as I say, so that you can hear this separately, we'll send Stephanie's video out to you. But basically, this was a common scenario of the last village facility in Holbrook in Derbyshire. We know that pubs are closing down at a phenomenal rate of at least 2 a week in the UK. And what the residents decided was that they didn't want to lose their last village amenity and they wanted to do something about bringing it back into use. So the pub was actually sold to a property development company originally, and they had to register for it as a community asset of interest. So basically they had to try and protect that asset so that they could make a bid. It was interesting listening to Stephanie. They came together and they did exactly what you tried to do. They decided to do a crowdfunding campaign. They went out there and they quite quickly raised some money, but they got stuck at about £18,000. Well, they needed well over £200,000. And it's interesting. 5 years ago, if I had wanted to talk about social investment, everybody wanted to talk about crowdfunding. And I do think that there is this myth that crowdfunding is easier. And actually, it probably is anything but the easiest way to raise investment. So they worked out quite quickly that they needed help to do this. And they were able to work with an organisation called the Plunkett Foundation, which runs a programme called More Than a Pub, which is supported by Power to Change. And they were able to work with the community shares unit in order to put out a community shares offer. And they did that working with Crowdfunder, which was one of the platforms that I've talked to you about. So again, Crowdfunder charge a percentage. I think it's 5% for listing, but they're obviously able to put the share offer out to a much, much wider range of people. They actually went on to raise over £178,000. They, again, like Mel, this is another interesting dynamic. Often you will find that small amounts of social investment can help to leverage quite large amounts of grant funding, so they're able to access some grant funding as well. And they went on to purchase the pub. They have completely renovated the pub now. Very proud to say it's a pub, but it's not just a pub. It does much more than that. So it also has a bed and breakfast. It has a community cafe where they have lovely cream teas. They run a heritage cycle tours, they have a post office contract, and they also have a delivery or distribution depot for the local area. One of the things that I think is really interesting about the Spotted Cow is they do actually do some non-eligible trading activity. So the tenancy part of their organisation, in other words, it's a lease or a let, a contract with another organisation, would fall into the non-eligible category of things that social investment tax relief can be used for. But what they do is make sure that it doesn't constitute more than 20% of their income. So some of the things you might know about social investment tax relief is you are able to use it for trading activity, but there are some things which Neil, our friendly solicitor, would often refer to as the naughty list, so some things you can't do. And leasing, letting and assets on hire is one of them. But the way that Holbrook have put their business plan together is they're able to do that piece of activity, but it doesn't constitute more than 20% of the overall income. I know that Stephanie said that it was very much learning as they went. She definitely describes probably not having been able to do it without the support of Plunkett and the wraparound support. So it seems to me that raising SITR whichever way, the bits of support you get are actually invaluable. The other thing that she said was that applying for advanced assurance for them, because of this 80-20 rule, was very complex, and some of the resources that we have gone on to develop from Get SITR, she felt would have been really, really helpful. So the next thing that we're going to launch through Get SITR is an editable pre-assurance document. So instead of starting with a blank piece of paper, and we already have a webinar and a guide that says you should put these things in, instead of now starting with a blank piece of paper, we're going to give you some set phrases that you can edit or delete and then put your individual information in. So hopefully that will be helpful. I'm going to pick up now Dominic's question, which is around, this is one that often comes up, is when you're thinking about a variety of funding sources, how does SITR work alongside equity-based investment that qualifies for SEIS? Goodness me, lots of acronyms, so let me try and take each of them in turn. There are a number of different tax reliefs that can be used to raise investment or to support donations. The three most common that get talked about in this space are EIS, so I've covered that already, Enterprise Investment Scheme, SEIS, Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, SITR, Social Investment Tax Relief. SITR was actually created to give social enterprises and charities an equivalent to EIS, okay? Because EIS and SEIS only work for organisations who have share capital that they can give away. So it's an equity investment that would be received. And the thing is, the vast majority of social enterprises and charities don't have equity that they can give away. So the great thing with SITR is it works for both debt, so loans, as well as equity, as in shares. I often get asked the question about, can you use more than one tax relief in the same deal, and which is the best? I'm not sure there's a straightforward answer to, is there at best? I think it's about which tax relief suits the purpose of your investment most appropriately. And can you use more than one tax relief? You can use more than one tax relief in an overarching deal. You can't use more than one tax relief on the same portion of the money. And again, this sort of conversation I found started to become very complex because, again, not a tax expert, not a tax expert either. Again, we've worked with Bates, Wells and Braithwaite to produce a second simple guide, which is called a simple guide to tax reliefs. And what it does is it breaks down each one of those tax relief, also covers gift aid, community investment tax relief, and the one that I struggle to pronounce, IFISAs. So it's a particular, an impact-based ISA. Again, when we send around the notes, I'll send you the links to those two simple guides, but you can find them. If you put in Get SITR, you will find them on our pages. So I think, Dominic, hopefully that will help to answer that question about which works for which type of investment, and also which type of tax relief is the most appropriate. Yes, thank you, Dominic. We got lots and lots of acronyms in there. Anne Helen asked about the questions, what are the actual costs for the social enterprise apart from the interest rate? So what's the level of admin costs? I think we probably covered this before. So usually, if I run down them for the three different ways, and then perhaps Julius, you can jump in if I miss anything. But I think if we were to compare the three different ways, and Mel as well from the fund point. But a fund manager will charge an interest rate plus an administration fee. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example, but it's not necessarily Mel's example. It's just a worked example. So it could be that you pay 7% interest rate for your for lending the money, and you might pay an additional 2%, for instance, as an arrangement and administration fee. So therefore, your compound rate would be 9% across the deal. The pro is that you wouldn't have to go and find the investors, and you'll get help with the advanced assurance, and you will get help with stress testing your numbers. The cons is that it might be slightly more expensive than you would find doing a direct investment. If you were raising investment using community shares or crowdfunding, you would set an interest rate with the advice and guidance of the platform as to what you think investors will tolerate. And we have seen investment rates out there raising from starting at 1.5% and going all the way through to 9%. So again, it's probably about who do you think the investors are and what will they accept. And then on top of whatever that interest rate is, you would have to pay the crowdfunding, the platform, a percentage fee for doing the raise, probably based on, or usually based on, how much money you're going to raise. And I think they raise somewhere between 3 and 5%, those rates are. But of course, you would have to check each of these things with each of the individuals. I feel like I need to do a legal disclaimer now, because these are typical examples. And then with a direct deal, you would pay the 3% interest, plus usually a fee to the IFA. In this case, it was waived because it's pro bono, but usually you would have to pay a fee to the IFAs. I actually have no idea what that fee would be. Not too sure. Yeah. So I probably could, I'll try and find out and get some guidance actually onto what sort of fee level that would be. Usually, again, it would be, I would imagine, as a percentage of the investment raised rather than a flat fee, but I will find out. And then you will pay a fee to the advisor that you work with, who would usually be somebody who would help you maybe structure your prospectus, the terms, the loan note, and those sorts of things. Again, those sorts of rates are usually based on hours spent rather than a percentage of the raise. So again, you'd have to look at your individual advisor, what those costs would be. But I think the reason that I'm covering these things is, again, what often people feel is, oh, well, we'll go for the cheapest rate of interest, but that's not necessarily the total cost of the deal. And you have to consider as well what your networks are like. So again, finding those people to invest, and how much time you've got to go out and find those individuals. Sharon has asked us, what do investors on Community Cow get, on the Spotted Cow get from Community Holbrook Society? Now, I'm going to tell you, but I'm doing this from memory because I remember writing it down, so I'm not 100% sure I've got this right. But again, in the note we sent out afterwards, I'll go and check my notes. But I'm fairly sure it's about 3.5% that they get in terms of interest rate on the community shares. Obviously, what's quite interesting about the community shares is that most people, they are redeemable. You don't get any more money back on the share that you originally invested. You could essentially take your money back out after 3 years if you wanted to, but you generally find that people invest in community shares don't invest for the purpose of trying to get their capital out, but they are redeemable. Okay, Sarah wants to know, we have supported a community pub and community heritage centre to raise shares and peer-to-peer lending during the summer of 2017. Can they apply retrospectively for SITR? Within the current tax year, there is the ability to retrospectively claim SITR. You would need to make sure that you've got advanced assurance. We keep talking about advanced assurance. So what that is a way of being able to give your investors confidence that the scheme that you're applying for is entitled to claim social investment tax relief. And for very many investors, they would want to see your letter of advanced assurance before they put their investment in. Now, obviously, in this situation, you've already got the investment. I think that's probably one, Sarah, for a separate conversation. So one of the things that we offer as part of the Get SITR campaign is some one-to-one SITR surgeries with our SITR tax expert. And they can be done either face-to-face, either in Birmingham or London, or via Skype or Zoom. And Neil, who's my phone a friend on SITR, because if you ask me any really technical, difficult questions and I don't know, I'll just phone him up and ask. He may be able to actually talk to you in more detail about how the retrospective piece works. I think we have some notes from the new rules webinar that we ran, which cover this point. So I'll try and find those out for you, Sarah. But if you drop Luna and I a line afterwards, we can tell you how else we can help you with that information. I'm going to also share with you the top tips that we got from the expert panel we had last time round, things that they would advise. But I'm also going to put you on standby, I suppose, Mel and Julius, for you to come back and say, you know, what advice you would give. So if you were doing the same thing, giving your top tips, after I've shared those from the investors and advisors, perhaps think about what you would share with the rest of the participants. So I thought it would be worth me just sharing their top tips, she says. Where have they gone? There we are. So let's do the community shares top tips first of all. These were from Dave Boyle, who works for the Community Shares Company and often works with the Community Shares Unit and Power to Change on their Community Shares Booster Programme. He said, to make it worthwhile applying to use the tax relief, you need to ensure the investors who might find this most appealing know about it. So I think that very much plays to Julius's point, not enough people know about it. I hope that both the video that is great, but you couldn't hear it, the video that we produced, the essential guide, the SITR fact sheet we're about to publish, and lots of the resources we have on our website. Hopefully now you can use those to help try and educate more people around what social investment tax relief is. So he said to do this, make sure their accountants and professional advisors, the people who are most likely to have relationships with high net worth and sophisticated investors, know, so they understand what the tax relief is and does, and so they are likely to talk to their clients about it. Interestingly enough, we actually have an event planned on the 7th of November with one of our partner organisations, whose name is Philanthropy Impact, and it is designed actually to focus entirely on that. So yeah, we take that very seriously as well. Russ's top tip, or Russ Bubbly from I for Change, which was the advisor that Julius was talking about working with, he said, whatever option you choose to raise investment using SITR, do what's right for your organisation and the best option for you. He says, do your research and select your route, because don't just, if you like, pick the one you think might be cheapest. You have to consider time, access to investors, and you know how well you know your subject area as well. So you know, sitting there counting those customers against, you know, Mel, you'd obviously have to trade that off because you were pre-start, but Mel, you were actually running your organisation, so you'd have to think about you not being able to run activities while you were doing some of those things. Grace's top tip from Revenants was, make sure your investor, whether a fund manager or individual investors, are aligned with your values. Actually, that's a good one I've heard from a couple of other organisations who've done it direct, where I think they've ended up with one or two investors in the portfolio. Maybe I think they thought they were on the same page, but it's been a bit of a struggle. And make sure you do your own due diligence on your investors. So if you're getting investment from a fund, they will do that, but if not, make sure that you're doing your due diligence on your direct investors. And you're going to be in an investment relationship for over 3 years, so it's important that it works, okay? So that it works for both of you. And Neil's top tip, who's our tax expert, says, using a tax relief, including SITR, can be time consuming, so do your tax homework early. Doesn't sound appealing, does it? But you need to do your tax homework early. And making sure that you are eligible and gaining pre-assurance will help you to reduce risk, reduce wasted time and money, and also ensure your credibility with potential investors. Again, we've got lots of information about the top tips for pre-assurance and how to do that on our website. So let's come back. Have we got any more questions? No? Do you have to get, we have one run out, do you have to accept all investors who sign up? No, I don't think you have to accept that. No, a definitive answer, but I presume the answer is no, you don't have to accept their money.
Yeah, I would assume not, because then after you kind of have the initial agreement, you then have to mutually agree your loan note, so I would assume not.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you raise the investment via. So if you're raising through a platform, then I don't think you'll have any control over the investors are, because you're putting it out there to a mass audience. If you are raising investment through a fund, then I'm not sure. Mel, let me ask you this question. Do you actually know the identity of your individual investors into your scheme, or are they? No. So again, you would have to accept.
We're aware through press releases to some of the investors that were interested in investing in us, but it's not disclosed at any point to it.
Okay, so you don't, through a fund, have a direct relationship. The direct relationship is with the investment manager rather than with the social enterprise or charity. Yeah. But if you're taking direct investment, which Julius did, yes, if you were uncomfortable with an investor, you could choose potentially to decline that investor. I think you'd have to think through quite carefully how you manage that situation. But yeah, you could technically choose whose money to accept. Belinda's asking me a question: is the not more than 30% rule applicable for CIC limited by guarantee? Yeah, it's for all of the eligible organisations that can raise SITR. So again, just to remind you, they are KICs, limited by share or guarantee, community benefit societies or charities. But no one individual can have more than 30% of the debt. Now, if you already have raised investment, then, and let's say you have a loan with, let me say, a charitable trust or foundation like Esme Fairburn, then they could be counted as one of the investors. So let's say that you had already raised £50,000 worth of loan from them, not necessarily using social investment tax relief, and you went on to raise another £100,000 using social investment tax relief. You could effectively have just two investors in that space, because then you would still, the total would be, you'd have three investors, each had £50,000, so nobody's got more than a third of the debt. Okay, but Belinda, it applies to all of the different eligible governance structures. Okay, so no more questions at the moment. So let's come back and take some advice from our panelists. Mel, what would you say if you were advising somebody else to do this? What advice or top tips would you give them?
Okay, I don't want this to sound negative, because it's not supposed to sound negative, but be prepared for the distraction of it all, because it's much more complex and time consuming than I ever thought it would be. And the difficulty, certainly as a small company, is to have that strategy to get you through that interim period where you've decided to go for some funding and it actually happening. But for us, that was difficult, and that was a challenge. It was all worth it in the end. But as a director of all of the operations of that company, it was very time consuming at times. And yeah, I think that's something, it's just not like your high street lending. And on reflection, that's a very positive thing. At the time, it can be quite a challenge.
Okay. That's a really good piece of advice, actually. You know, as social entrepreneurs, we want to get on and do the stuff that we want to do, but taking investment is not something to be treated lightly, and it is something that does require considerable focus and time. So yeah, I think that's a really good.
Sorry, Mel. Just to add to that, it's not something you want to do as a business when you've got your back against the wall, if that makes sense. So you have to be sustainable. You have to, I think you mentioned it before, you have to, you know, it's because, you know, some companies will want to take loans because they've got to get themselves out of the hole. This is definitely not one of those things. You have to be sustainable while you get it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think particularly with something like social investment tax relief, where you're going to have a long-term relationship. In fact, there is again, a very small technical rule that says you can't apply for SITR if your business is actually in trouble. It's quite difficult, actually, it's very technical in terms of how you would actually prove that that was the case or not. But SITR is, yeah, definitely not meant to be used in that way. And also remembering that the investors are taking that highest form of risk. So they're expecting you to be very honest and transparent. Thanks for that. I think that's a really good thing to remember, Mel. And I think often something that people forget when they enter into this process, that this is going to be like another part of their business and they've got to do it alongside. What about you, Julius? What advice would you give, or top tips would you give?
Yeah, I would echo all of that. That it is going to take time, so you definitely have to be prepared for it, and your business has to be in a stage where you can take kind of the time out to focus on going out and finding the right individuals. But I would also add to that to be aware of all of the costs, like we were saying, not just the interest. Because you have to factor that into your thinking and into your forecast as well, and then kind of just be prepared to educate people as you go through the process as well. So you have to kind of make sure that you know exactly dates on everything, the exact process, and because you're probably going to have to help other people through it as well.
Okay, actually that's another really good point. If you're doing direct investment, is that you go for pre-assurance to have the ability to give confidence to your investors. But if you fail to give them the SITR claim certificate, all of that will mean nothing. And there is absolutely no recourse with HMRC if you forget the date. Okay, so there are things that you have to do in this process to make sure that your investors can claim their SITR. Again, we've got lots of detail around how and when that is. But yes, you need to be in control of the process. It's not a sort of, okay, we've done that and we don't have to worry about that. I think I'm just trying to think of something that Stephanie said. She said that she would have loved to have worked with another organisation that had raised community shares using SITR. She said that working with the legal and the support she had from Plunkett, etc., was invaluable, but she would really have benefited from listening and working with a peer who'd done it before, because they did feel a little bit like they were just, a bunch of local individuals who this wasn't their core job or expertise, trying to work their way through it. And so having that sort of buddy or peer mentor might have been a really good experience. So that's one of the things, again, that we're really keen to do. I've got a couple of last questions. Thanks, Gary, who's having to leave now, but that's fine. Belinda, you're absolutely right. It's 30%. It's a third. Nobody can have more than a third. So yeah, my example was technically right, but it's not a 30%. Nobody can have more than a third. So you can't have a controlling interest. That's why it's there. And Tracy asked a question about being in receipt of grant funding. Being in receipt of grant funding doesn't mean that you would not be considered to be able to raise investment using social investment tax relief, but there would certainly be a question around what the long-term sustainability of your organisation is if your current model is using 100% of grant income. And I think this comes from increasingly grant makers and trusts and foundations who make grants, who many of them actually also now have social investment funds that they make, are increasingly talking about sustainability. So what happens in 5 years' time if you're going to keep coming back to them asking for the same amount of money to cover core costs to keep your organisation coming? They're probably going to be less and less likely to want to continue to do that kind of follow-on funding. So what often organisations are looking for is for you to be able to have a business plan that shows trading income. And let's not forget that social investment tax relief can only be used to support a trade. So whilst I said that grant can be used to leverage small amounts of social investment, can sometimes be used to leverage large amounts of grant income. Certainly in the Spotted Cows example, the grant they raised, lots of that was actually for the capital renovation of the building, so not something that would be needed as an ongoing cost. And a lot of the SITR money that they raised is more about the working capital to continue to go through. So I think it depends on how the grant fund is embedded in your mix of income. But it's often used as a way to try and help people to move from being 100% grant dependent to being more sustainable, because trading income is seen to be more in your control. It's not about you writing to a grant giver to give you the money. It's about keeping that relationship with your customers and selling more coffee or selling more high ropes activities, Mel. So what, in terms of your grant that you got, Mel, for Challenge Academy, how does that grant balance against the investment? You know, what's the grant for, and how do you think that contributes to your sustainability?
Yeah, well, we actually qualified for 2 grants, both from Staffordshire and both rural enterprise. So based on the rural communities, believe it or not, although we are right next to the Black Country because we're in the South Staffs region, and then we qualified for these grants. One is for our the business offer, which, although I didn't introduce it at the start, is all about our resources and programs. We have a resource called Terra Firma Bags of Character, which we train other teachers, youth workers, and facilitators how to use the bags of character, and then they go out and use them. That's our business offer. And we qualified for the called the Rural Enterprise Programme funding for that, which is European Social Fund. And that was at a basis of 60% for us to use our own money, and therefore qualify for a 40% grant. The other element of funding was through something called CMD Leader, which is also a Staffordshire grant, also 60%, 40%, and that was for the development of what we call our business to consumer facilities at Bagridge. So extensions of the high ropes course, a bouldering wall, climbing activities, and a junior adventure zone, and also to develop a park for the community, so giving them access to things like adventure walks, detective trails, disc golf, and various programs at the weekends, just to get people in the outdoors and a little bit healthier.
Okay, so
so we use the resonance, you know, that like I said, I think it was in round figures, £125,000 of our investment was to get that match funding. To get that additional £90,000.
Okay, again, so quite a lot of capital investment and also quite a lot of community investment. So things that are important locally in terms of impact and making the site accessible for the community, but obviously supported by a very robust business plan. You know, Challenge Academy does a range of different things, don't you, Mel, with as you said, business to business, business to customer, and also the community, and particularly with a range of activities that are offered to individuals that are often either isolated or struggled perhaps with confidence and returning to work, etc., and have a range of multi-use. I think that's probably bring us to our end. I hope that you've enjoyed some time finding more from our peers that have been there and done that. If you aren't already signed up to our Get SITR campaign, please do consider to do so, because when we launch any new resources like the editable pre-assurance document, that's where you will find it. And also we're available if anyone's got any individual questions offline. Thank you very much. Had some really positive questions and feedback from all of you, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon.